All right, let's dive into a real head-scratcher from the world of luxury. It's what we're calling the Swiss watch paradox. And it's a story all about how you can sell more stuff, but somehow end up earning less money. We're going to break down exactly how that's even possible.
I mean, think about it. How can you sell more, but earn less? It just doesn't make sense, right? Selling more of something should mean more cash in the bank. But, in early 2026, the Swiss watch industry found itself in this bizarre situation that just turned all of that basic logic completely on its head.
Okay, so here's the first piece of our puzzle. In January 2026, the industry shipped out 2% more watches compared to the year before. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, but it's nearly 23,000 extra watches heading out to stores all over the world. So, on the surface, you'd think, hey, that's great news. But, and this is the big twist, even with all those extra watches going out the door, the total value of those exports actually went down by 3.6%. So, let that sink in. More watches, less money. That, right there, is the paradox we're here to solve.
And just so we're all on the same page, this isn't just speculation. All of our data comes directly from the official report put out by the Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry, or FH for short. So yeah, this is straight from the horse's mouth.
Now, there's one really important thing to keep in mind here. These are export figures. That means we're looking at the watches being shipped from Switzerland to the retailers around the world. It's not the final price you or I would pay in a store. Think of it more like a measure of wholesale demand, what the stores themselves are buying. Okay, let's start by looking at the headline figures for January 2026. And, spoiler alert, it was kind of a weak start to the year.
So, that 3.6% drop we mentioned. In actual money, that means the total export value is about 1.9 billion Swiss francs. The takeaway here is pretty clear. The bottom line for the month was definitely in the red.
Now, the report does point out one thing that might have contributed to this. Turns out, January 2026 had one less working day than January 2025. And yeah, fewer days to ship things out can definitely have an impact, but it doesn't come close to explaining the whole story.
And this is where we get to the heart of the luxury paradox. To really figure this out, we have to stop looking at all watches and start breaking them down by price point. Because believe me, this is where it all starts to make sense. And wow, here it is. Look at this split. The value of the most expensive watches, we're talking anything over 3,000 francs, it didn't just dip, it plummeted by 8.1%. But at the same time, the mid-range, watches between 500 and 3,000 francs, that segment absolutely exploded, jumping by a massive 17.7%.
Even the official FH report doesn't mince words. They say that this marked decline at the top end had a huge impact on the overall performance. It was basically the anchor that dragged the whole industry's value into the negative. So, there you have it. That's the answer to our paradox. The industry shipped more watches in total because that mid-range was so hot, but it earned less money because the losses from the super expensive, ultra-luxury watches were just so massive they wiped out all those other gains. Okay, so now that we've cracked the price puzzle, there's another layer to this story that really backs it all up. And that's what the watches were actually made of. And look, the data on materials tells almost the exact same story. Watches made from precious metals, solid gold, platinum, their value dropped by 14%. But by metallic watches, the ones that mix steel and gold, they surged by over 16%. It's the same pattern, right? The super expensive materials took a hit, while the more attainable, best of both worlds options did incredibly well. So yeah, it was the real heavy hitters of the watch world, those solid gold status symbols, that took the biggest hit. And that drop lines up perfectly with the slump we saw in that over 3,000 franc price category.
But on the flip side, you've got the breakout star of the month, bimetallic watches. Not only was their value up, but the number of units shipped went up by a crazy 45.1%. This really points to a big shift, with people looking for that touch of luxury, but maybe without the full-on precious metal price tag.
Okay, so we've seen what's happening with prices in materials. Now let's zoom out and look at the world map, because this story definitely had its winners and losers in different countries.
And first up, we have to talk about the biggest market of them all, the USA. What happens in the US market has a huge ripple effect across the entire industry. And, well, exports to the US stumbled badly, falling by 14%. When you see a double-digit drop in your number one market, that's a serious headwind. It's a huge piece of why the industry's overall numbers look so grim.
The US wasn't the only one struggling either. We saw similar slowdowns in places like Japan and Germany. But then you look over at Asia, and it's a completely different picture.
Both China and Hong Kong were actually up, which could be a really good sign of a recovery happening in that super important part of the world. And then, get this, you have the total outlier, France. Exports there didn't just grow a little bit, they absolutely exploded, up by almost 37%. It just goes to show you how unpredictable the global luxury market can be from one month to the next.
So, we've looked at prices, materials, and the global markets. Let's step back and connect all the dots to see the full picture.
Really, this whole story can be boiled down to 3 simple steps. First, the industry shipped more watches but made less money. That's our paradox. Second, the reason why is a huge slump right at the very top of the market in that ultra-luxury category. And third, that slump was so big it completely wiped out the really strong growth we saw in the mid-range.
All of this leaves us with a really fascinating question, doesn't it? Is the world starting to fall out of love with ultra-luxury? Or maybe, are people just getting smarter? You know, finding that sweet spot, that perfect mix of prestige and price somewhere in the middle. I think that's going to be the real story to watch as the year goes on.